here. In United States, it is estimated that about 20 million people have gallstones, with approximately 1 million new cases developing each year. Okay. Now, a little bit about the anatomy of gallbladder. I think you all know about this. This is a picture of gallbladder showing.
স্যার বলছি আমরা শুধু ফার্স্ট স্লাইডটাই দেখতে পাচ্ছি, লং কেস ডিসকাশন অন কোলেলিথিয়াসিস, বাকিগুলো তো।
নেক্সট স্লাইড আই হ্যাভ জাস্ট গন, ইউ ক্যান নট সি দিস। এই স্লাইডটা দেখতে পাচ্ছ না? আমি চেঞ্জ করলাম স্লাইড। স্লাইড চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে না? আচ্ছা, এসকেপ করে দিলে এই না হয়ে যায়, বন্ধ না হয়ে যায়। হ্যাঁ, সিদ্ধার্থ কোথায় গেল? আচ্ছা, একটুখানি ওয়েট করো, আমরা ওটাকে সলভ করার চেষ্টা করছি। আমি করছি স্যার। আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে। ওরা কিন্তু ফার্স্ট স্লাইডটাই শুধু দেখতে পাচ্ছিল, যখন চেঞ্জ করলাম। এখনো কি তোরা দেখতে পাচ্ছিস না নেক্সট স্লাইড? আমি স্লাইড চেঞ্জ করেছি।
না স্যার, না স্যার, একটা প্রথমটাই দেখাচ্ছে,
ছোট হিসেবেই দাও, তাহলে মনে হয় সুবিধা হবে। এবার চেঞ্জ দেখা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, এবার চেঞ্জ হলো।
তাহলে এটাই। ওকে, ঠিক আছে। So, as I was telling you that regarding the first slide, it is a common disorder of gallbladder, and ducts are extremely common and commonly affects people with sedentary lifestyle and obesity. And I was just telling that we will discuss about the risk factors and predisposing factors of gallstone formation and those things later on in the slides. And as I was telling, there is a statistical analysis that in the United States, it is estimated that about 20 million people have gallstones, with approximately 1 million new cases developing each year. Okay. Now about the anatomy. You know about the anatomy of gallbladder. It has got a fundus, body, neck. Then through the cystic duct, it drains into the hepatic duct, common hepatic duct, and then from the common bile duct. You know about this very well. And like here, it has been written that it is a pear-shaped sac with approximately 7 to 10 centimeter long. It has a capacity of 30 to 50 ml, and when obstructed, it can increase up to 300 ml. Now, what happens? The bile is formed, and it drains when we are in a fasting state. The sphincter of OD is actually closed. So bile which is formed, it got stored into the gallbladder. And when we take food, there is contraction of the gallbladder, and at the same time there is relaxation of the sphincter of OD. So when it is in the fasting state, when the bile is stored inside the gallbladder, it is most of the water content of that bile is absorbed. So bile got much more concentrated. Okay. So and with the uptake or with taking of food, there is contraction of the gallbladder, and there is relaxation of the sphincter of OD, and that facilitates the drainage of the bile through the common bile duct, and ultimately it drains into the duodenum. Now, some physiology: the smooth muscle in the gallbladder contract, as I have already said, when we take food, leading to bile being secreted into the duodenum. Now it facilitates to get rid of the body waste stored in the bile, and is also helps in the absorption of dietary fat by solubilizing them using bile acids. You all know, and it also facilitates the fat soluble vitamins also, the cholesterol absorption, keeping the cholesterol in the soluble form. It also facilitates that. Now, you know. Now, what is choledithiasis? Now, when gallstone or collection of cholesterol, bile pigment, and or a combination of the two which can form in the gallbladder, or within the bile ducts of the liver. Now, presence of stone in the gallbladder is called cholelithiasis. You know that. Now, types of gallstone. There are three types of gallstone mainly: cholesterol stone, pigment stone, and mixed stone. Now, cholesterol stone or pure cholesterol stone are not that common. Now, how cholesterol stone is formed? I will come back to this slide. This is the pathophysiology of formation of the stone. You know that I have already said that just a few minutes back, that the cholesterol part is usually not soluble. To keep that in the solution, there is micelle formation, and there is the concentration between bile salt, bile acids, and phospholipid with cholesterol. It is almost 25:1. That is the ratio. So by any fact that if there is decrease in the bile acid synthesis or there is increase in cholesterol synthesis, that ratio gets altered, and that is called the lithogenicity of the bile, and that is supersaturation of the bile with cholesterol. So that creates what? There will be formation of precipitates, and ultimately those aggregates and ultimately form gallstone. And when there is inflammatory changes, this is called cholecystitis. So there is the cholesterol stone, pigment stone. Pigment stone are mainly are much more pigment stone are black pigment and brown pigment. Black pigment stone are formed in mostly in patients with hemolytic disease like sickle cell disease, etc., and cirrhosis patient also. And there is also brown pigment stone. Brown pigment stone mainly occurs in the CBD due to when the bile stasis occurs and there is infection into the bile that ultimately leads to the formation of brown pigment stone. Pigment stone are actually cannot be dissolved. So whenever there is the pigment stone is present, we need to operate that. So there is a therapy called dissolution therapy, we will discuss later. That is not possible in case of pigment stone. And mixed stone, wherein there is both type of elements are present, this is called mixed stone.
স্যার বলছি পিগমেন্ট স্টোনে হিমোলাইটিক ডিজিজের স্টোনটা কালার কি হবে?
ইউজুয়ালি যে ব্ল্যাক যেটা আছে ব্ল্যাক পিগমেন্ট স্টোন ব্ল্যাকিশ কালার হবে, আনকনজুগেটেড বিলিরুবিন কন্টেন্টটা বেশি থাকে, ঠিক আছে। ব্রাউন পিগমেন্ট, ব্ল্যাক পিগমেন্ট, যেটা আমি বললাম এক্ষুনি, দুটো টাইপের পিগমেন্ট স্টোন হয়, একটা ব্ল্যাক পিগমেন্ট স্টোন, একটা ব্রাউন পিগমেন্ট। কোলেস্টেরল স্টোন হোয়াইটিশ, তার সঙ্গে একটু ইয়েলোইশ ট্যান থাকতে পারে, সেটা হচ্ছে পিওর কোলেস্টেরল স্টোন। ওকে।
Yes, sir.
Incidence and prevalence. In book, it is written that incidence of cholelithiasis or gallstone disease is much more common in the eastern region. Although in this slide it is written that 2% in south and 7% in north, but much more common in eastern region. And northern region is more than southern. Northern region people are much prone to develop peptic ulcer disease. These are written in the books, and with time it can change although, and it is more in women, especially is multiparous women and person of more than 40 years of age. Okay, I am coming to the risk factors now. Risk factors, you know, first thing I will come to this slide. You know this thing, the fat, 40, female and fertile. You should remember this because whenever you are going to take any history of a patient, suspected patient of cholelithiasis or chronic cholecystitis, whatever, you should remember this fact because you are often asked that why are you telling this case as a patient of cholelithiasis. From history itself, you can say this, that this is a female patient of certain age, if she is more than 40 years and she is fertile. So you can say these facts also, that from history itself, these are some positive facts you have got. Okay, so from that respect, you should remember these facts also. Then, so the risk factors are women, multiparity, OCP, birth control pills, pregnancy, family history, obesity, then diabetes, sedentary lifestyle, rapid weight loss. Actually, all those things like birth control pills or women, that is multiparous women, these are the estrogen is the fact that which causes, the main fact is there is alteration between the ratio of bile acid and the cholesterol, that micelle formation was disrupted and the cholesterol becomes insoluble, and thus that cholesterol precipitate forms. So everything here, woman, multiparity, birth control pills, certain things, all that disrupt actually that cholesterol concentration increases or bile acid concentration decreases in this case. Now I will come to the symptoms part of cholelithiasis. Now what is symptoms? Symptoms mean what patient feels, and signs are what we elicit as a physician or as a surgeon, what we elicit during our examination. Those are the signs, and symptoms is what patient feels. So symptoms are part of chief complaints in history taking. What patient feels, that patient will tell you. So that will be included into the chief complaint part of history taking. So patient of cholelithiasis should usually present with these symptoms, following symptoms like pain and vomiting symptoms. Then dyspeptic symptoms. Vomiting is also a part of dyspeptic symptoms. Then some inflammatory symptoms, and then some symptoms related to the complication like cholangitis, gallbladder perforation, or empyema of the gallbladder. Certain complication, if that is present, that are part of the related to the complication due to cholelithiasis or cholecystitis. So we will now discuss about the certain points of these things. Like when you are going to describe that, like in the heading of history of present illness, in this part of long case taking, all these symptoms are discussed from the beginning to the time of examination. That is when that symptoms arises first to the time, the journey of those symptoms to the time, along the time, and from at the time when you are examining the patient actually. So how to describe pain? Pain should be described under certain heading. Like first of all, you have to inquire about the site of pain, like where did the pain start? These are some questions you have to ask the patient to describe the pain actually. So first is site of pain. Where did the pain start? Some patient can pinpoint the site of the pain where from it has started, but most of the time they give some vague history also. But you have to inquire to at least elicit, to at least find out that which organs region is involved. Then origin and mode of onset. That is, how did the pain start? How did the pain start? Sometimes patient will say the pain had started suddenly. Sometimes patient will say pain has started gradually. So that depends. When sudden start of the pain, sudden constant pain, if there is patient, we usually think of something like perforation or something like that. It is constant pain and sudden onset. And gradual pain, gradual constant pain, we think about like pancreatitis and certain type of thing. Then you have to inquire of the duration of the pain, how long the pain is present, followed by the severity and quality of the pain. Then the nature of pain. Nature of pain in cases of cholecystitis or cholelithiasis, usually we say colicky pain. Now what is colicky pain? Colicky pain occurs due to the contraction, muscular contraction of something which when it tries to overcome certain obstruction. Okay, it tries to get rid of the contents within it, the muscular contraction of a tube. So in cases of gallstone disease, when the outlet is blocked due to the stone, the gallbladder will try to contract and try to release the bile which is inside the gallbladder. But due to the stone, when it is blocked, the outlet is blocked, it will not be able to release that bile, and that will lead to the colicky pain. And later on, if it is not completely blocked, if it gets rid of the obstruction and bile get released, that pain can subside after some time. Then the progression of pain, like how is the pain progressing? Progression, sometimes it is, like I have already said, it can be sudden onset and then suddenly it has released, and sometimes it can continue as such. Sometimes it will start at a very high note and can stay at that note. Sometimes it will gradually increase and then reach a plateau phase. Okay, so you have to inquire about all those things like the progression of pain. Then the movement of pain. In movement of pain, you have to inquire about radiation of pain, referred pain, and then shifting or migration of pain. And what happens in radiation of pain? In radiation of pain, the patient will observe pain at a different site from the original site of the pain. And at the same time, the original site of the pain is also present, and the site where the pain has radiated, that at that part also patient will feel the pain. It occurs like radiation of pain if there is a perforation of the posterior wall of the stomach or something. The patient will feel pain in the back, and that part of the side where the exactly epigastrium is also, there will also be pain. So here both the sides patient is having pain in radiation of pain. But in referred pain, what happens, the patient will feel pain at a site different from the original site of the disease or inflammation. Okay, like in cases when there will be inflammation or there is the subdiaphragmatic collection or like that, the pain is referred to the shoulder, right shoulder, tip of right shoulder, like that. Now in that case, you all know that diaphragm is like C345 and shoulder is C45. So this is referred pain. Patient will not feel pain at the side of the diaphragm, but the pain is referred to the shoulder. So patient will feel pain at the shoulder region. And the original site of inflammation or disease, there is no pain. This is referred pain. And shifting and migration of pain, you all know, like in appendicitis. What happens? Initially, there will be visceral pain. Like the appendix is inflamed. Appendix is innervated by T9 and 10, and umbilical region is also innervated by T9 and 10. So initial pain in the umbilical region due to the inflammation, that is due to the visceral component of the pain. Then after some time, when the inflammation has increased, it will involve the parietal peritoneum also. As the normal position of the appendix is right iliac fossa, when the inflammation has increased and it will involve the parietal region also, then the patient will say that he or she is having pain in the right iliac fossa, McBurney's point, whatever you say. So this is shifting pain. Then the next thing is any special time of pain. This is more important in like duodenal ulcer, peptic ulcer, you know, that hunger pain or pain due to taking of food. In cases of biliary colic or cholecystitis or gallstone disease, sometimes patient may say that pain increases on taking of fatty meal or heavy meal also. Because I have already said, due to the contraction of the gallbladder against the obstructing stone. Then the periodicity of the pain and also some aggravating and relieving factor. What causes the pain? What is increasing the pain? If anything is increasing the pain or anything is relieving the pain. So during eliciting the history, you have of a patient who is complaining of pain. So you have to take note of these points and you have to take the history on certain these points. Now, along with this, there is in dyspeptic symptoms, there is vomiting. Very commonly vomiting is also present as a part of chief complaint in a patient of cholelithiasis. So that's why I am including this part of the this part also among history of present illness. So how to describe vomiting? I have just written down a mnemonic here, like COPD, Q2. I don't know whether it will be easy for you to remember those things, but I have just kept it in the slide. So how to remember or how to describe vomiting? First of all is content. What is the content? That depends upon the level of obstruction. Suppose if the obstruction is at the level of, I'm just telling you, giving you even example that if the obstruction is at the level of esophagus, then what will happen? Then the content of the vomiting will be food and saliva. If at the level of pylorus, then that food taken earlier, then saliva, then gastric juice. Okay, so these are something, but here also if there is at the level of pylorus or at the level of esophagus, there will be no bile present. Distal obstruction, there can be bile present. So content of the vomiting is important to elicit the level of obstruction, but in case of vomiting actually. Then origin is whether the pain, whether the vomiting has started before the pain arises or after the pain, because sometimes it has been seen that due to rigorous vomiting, sometimes patient develops some muscle spasm. Okay, so pain can appear after rigorous vomiting also. So you have to inquire whether vomiting has started before the pain or it has started after the pain. Then the progression of the vomiting, like in gastric outlet obstruction, patient gives history of progressive vomiting. Then duration, how long the vomiting is occurring. Then how frequently the vomiting occurring, that is the frequency of vomiting. And then the 2Q, that is quantity, the amount, and the quality of the vomiting. Okay, so whether there is blood mixed or not, you have to take this into account also when taking history or when elaborating a history of vomiting. Okay. I have not included other parts in abdominal examination. There are certain other parts also, as I'm mainly discussing about the cholelithiasis part. That's why I have kept pain and vomiting description in my slide. So in this
Sir, why there will be vomiting in case of cholelithiasis?
Actually, there will be vomiting in case of cholelithiasis due to inflammation. There will be reactive spasm. Inflammation of the gallbladder and stomach are in close proximity. Due to, if the inflammation is much more, this can lead to widespread inflammation that can lead to reactive spasm of the stomach. Okay, that's why the patient of acute cholecystitis usually sometimes present with vomiting. Yeah, understood?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now, in dyspeptic syndrome, apart from vomiting, patient may give history of heartburn, belching, bitter taste, and loss of appetite also. And inflammatory syndrome, patient can have history of fever with chills and rigor. Now, remember chills and rigor. Chills and rigor is actually a feature of cholangitis. So, a patient of simple cholelithiasis rarely gives you features of cholangitis. But remember chills and rigor. Whenever a patient gives you a history of fever with chills and rigor, you have heard chills and rigors in malaria. But when taking history of a surgery patient, you have to at least remember two things. Chills and rigor in surgery patient usually present in biliary sepsis and in urosepsis. So patient of biliary sepsis and patient of urosepsis, these two types of sepsis can present with fevers with chills and rigors. Okay, so this should also be included in the history. Now there are we have already discussed some risk factors. I have included this because I haven't included certain things. Obesity was part of the risk factor slide, but you should also take note of various drugs like cofibrate, cholestyramine, those drugs history. Cofibrate is a lipid lowering drug. Ileal disease and ileal resection. Actually, ileal disease and ileal resection, there will be malabsorption, the enterohepatic circulation will be disturbed, and there will be decreased reabsorption of the bile acid. So, bile acid pool will be decreased, and this can lead to decreased bile acids and supersaturation of the bile with cholesterol. And this is altered enterohepatic circulation I have just mentioned, and some genetic predisposition can also be present. You have to take note of that also. So those risk factors and predisposing factors which I have discussed is to be kept in mind during further history taking, which includes like past history, personal history, family history, treatment history, and history of allergy and drug. Okay, so like in women you have to take history of obstetric, gynecology, obstetric history, family history. Okay, so you have to take those history, keeping in those risk factors and predisposing factors in mind, so that you should include all those things in the history. Now we will.
Sir, একটা query ছিল. Hello, sir.
Follow.
স্যার বলছি মানে যাদের গলস্টোন হয় মানে আফটার কোলেসিস্টেক্টমি তারা তো কোলেস্টাইরামিন টাইপ অফ ড্রাগ খায়, তাহলে ওটা প্রিডিসপোজিং ফ্যাক্টর কেন?
প্রিডিসপোজিং ফ্যাক্টর কেন? কোলেস্টাইরামিন অ্যাকচুয়ালি কোলেস্টাইরামিন যেটা করে বেসিক্যালি এটা ওই সেম জিনিস বাইল অ্যাসিড যেটা কনসেন্ট্রেশনটাকে এটাতে সেটা কমিয়ে দেয়, ঠিক আছে, বাইল অ্যাসিডের পুলটাকে কমিয়ে দেয়।
ওকে স্যার।
আচ্ছা, now about the physical examination. Physical examination includes, you all know, the general survey, local examination, and systemic examination. So in cholelithiasis patient, you will examine actually the local examination of the abdomen, and systemic examination includes all other systems apart from the abdomen. So this is true for every other system also. So local abdominal examination, you know that it has got 4 parts: inspection, palpation, percussion and auscultation. This picture is showing that abdomen should be divided into the 9 quadrants by 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines. You know about the transpyloric and the transtubercular plane. I am not going to in details how to draw the transpyloric plane and how to draw the transtubercular plane. Okay, so abdomen is divided into these 9 quadrants. These are the: 1 is right hypochondriac, 2 is epigastric, 3 is left hypochondriac, then right and left lumbar, 7 and 8 is right and left iliac fossa, then umbilical and hypogastrium. Then examination should be done under good light and warm surrounding. It should be done usually in supine position with head supported by pillow and expose abdomen from the xiphisternum to symphysis pubis. Now in examination we look for the shape, skin and subcutaneous tissue, umbilicus, movement of abdomen, any obvious swelling and hernial size. You know that I am just discussing this. Now in shape of the abdomen, normally it is flat or slightly scaphoid and symmetrical. Abnormality usually is distended. Now causes of distension are these 5 F's like fat, fluid, fetus, flatus and feces. And if there is localized distension, if that is symmetrical, then mostly it is found in small bowel obstruction, and in case of any organomegaly there can be asymmetric or localized distension of the abdomen. Then about the umbilicus, normally it is placed almost in the midline, joining the tip of the xiphoid process to the symphysis pubis. Usually it is retracted and inverted, and abnormal in obese patient it can be shrunken, and in ascites it can be flat and everted also. It should also look for the movement, like in normal respiratory movement is equal in every quadrant, and in localized limitation is indicative of subjacent inflammation. If there is inflammation in certain site, there can be localized limitation of the movement of abdomen. Look for any visible pulsation, and whether that if pulsation is present, you have to differentiate whether it is transmitted pulsation or expansile pulsation. And in skin and subcutaneous tissue, you have to look for stria, scar marks, pigmentation or any superficial veins. You see there is stria marks, there is scar marks, and there is superficial dilated veins picture. Now in palpation, it has got 2 parts, superficial and deep palpation. Now routine palpation should be carried out with the flat of the hand using mainly the flexor surface of the fingers, and forearm should be in horizontal plane so that the fingers lie flat of the abdomen. You know that it has been written, it is written in the books also. Now to avoid the rigidity and guarding of the abdominal muscle, ask the patient to flex hip and knees, and advise the patient to breathe quietly and deeply with open mouth. And in winter, keep clinician hand warm by rubbing the hand each other, then start palpating the farthest from the site of the disease. If the site of the disease in the upper quadrant, then you start palpating from the lower quadrant. Now keep an eye on patient's face to know his or her reaction. Now various tender points. In palpation, you have to look for various tender points. Now if patient complaining of pain at the time of history, look for any tenderness over the following sites. Now depending upon the history. As I am discussing about polylithiasis, I have mentioned the 3 points here in the upper abdomen, like the gastric point, which is present in the point in the mid epigastrium. Duodenal point, it is in the transpyloric plane 2.5 cm to the right of the midline. And gallbladder point, it is at the junction of the lateral border of right rectus abdominis and the tip of right ninth costal cartilage. If you are asked about this various tender points in examination, then you should be careful about the site actually. Most of the time you forget about the site. Actually here the right ninth costal cartilage, right rectus abdominis. In case of McBurney's point, right-sided spine umbilical line, you often forget to tell those things. These are easy things, but you should actually remember to mention the anatomical site. Then one important thing is Murphy's sum. Now, to elicit tenderness in cholecystitis, one may place the right hand at the gallbladder point, and then patient is asked to take deep breath in. The gallbladder descends and hurts the examiner's finger, and the patient will immediately wince and with a catch of breath if the organ is inflamed. That is a sign of acute cholecystitis. Now, the next two thing is important. Next line is important. You should always look both sides. Should be similarly examined to note any difference. In cholecystitis, the right eighth rib becomes tender compared to the other side also. This should also be noted. Now, here is a picture how to elicit Murphy's sign. Now you can see this. The patient, the examiner has placed his hand at the side of gallbladder point, and the patient is asked to take deep breath, such thing. Now in this picture you can see that the examination is done in sitting position. If this examination is done in lying down position, then that is called the Moynihan's method of eliciting Murphy's sign. So it can be done in sitting position, and in Moynihan's method it is done in lying down position. Now palpation of abdominal organs, it includes palpation of other organs also, like liver, spleen, gallbladder, kidney. Now gallbladder, remember that gallbladder becomes palpable in mucocele of gallbladder, empyema gallbladder, and if enlarged gallbladder is associated with jaundice, then you should think about certain things like CA, head of pancreas, periampullary carcinoma, distal cholangiocarcinoma, and carcinoma GB also. Okay. Now when GB is distended, it can be felt as a tense globular swelling projecting downwards and forwards from below the liver, just lateral to outer border of right rectus abdominis muscle. And here the upper limit is continuous with the liver. So, and sometimes can be moved slightly from side to side. Now in percussion part, usually the normal percussion note is resonant except over the liver where it is dull. And things to be noted under percussion depending upon the patient, like fluid frills, shifting dullness, upper border of liver dullness, and then percussion of over any abdominal lump also. Now remember, in shifting dullness, you are often asked to elicit how to describe shifting dullness. Whenever in a patient, suppose in a patient your provisional diagnosis is chronic cholecystitis, you are asked to elicit the shifting dullness. The one mistake you often do, that you say that there is no, when you percuss on the one flank, you are asked to what is your finding. You say that it is resonant all the way. But actually you should get dull point at the extreme of the flank, and you should move the patient, and then you should again see whether there is any shifting of any dullness or not. So if there is no fluid is present in the abdomen, there will be a dull point at the extreme of the flank, but that shifting, that dullness will not shift. So never say that there is no dullness elicited if the entire abdomen is resonant. So these types of mistake I have at least seen sometimes done by the whatever you people. So
sir, can you please repeat?
During eliciting shifting dullness, what we do, we first percuss in the midline, then from the umbilicus to the one side of flank, and actually if there is fluid present, we will get a dull at a point of dullness, and we usually mark that point of level of dullness, and we usually ask the patient to shift to the other side or tilt to the other side, and then we again start percussing from the flank. And the purpose of doing this is to see whether there is any shifting of the dullness is occurring or not. If there is fluid is present, we usually found shifting dullness. But in a patient like a polylithiasis or something where there is no free fluid is present in the abdomen, you are asked to show how to elicit that shifting dullness. You will start percussing in the midline first, then from the umbilicus you will start percussing towards the flank. Then you should always say at the extreme of the flank you have noted a dullness. There will be dullness in the retropay when we go to the extreme of the flank. You have to mark that point of dullness. Then you have to ask the patient to tilt to the one side, and then start percussing from the flank again. And you will see that that dullness was there and it is not moving. Understand? বুঝতে পেরেছিস কি না বাংলায় বলবো বল?
Yes sir, বুঝতে পেরেছি।
ঠিক আছে, কারণ যখন
স্যার তখন রেজাল্টটা আমরা কি বলবো?
বলবি শিফটিং অফ ডালনেস নেই। অ্যাকচুয়ালি যেটা ভুল হয় তোরা বলিস যে পুরোটাই রেজোনেন্টই রয়েছে, তোরা ভেবেই নিস যে ফ্লুইড তো নেই, অতএব ডালনেসের কোনো গল্পই নেই। এটা একটা নরমালি মাথায় চলে আসে, বুঝতে পেরেছিস?
স্যার বুঝেছি।
এই জন্য এটা মাথায় রাখবি না, অ্যাকচুয়ালি তোরা ডালনেস পাবি, শিফটিং অফ ডালনেস নেই, সেটা মাথায় রাখতে হবে। ঠিক আছে? And auscultation, you have to look for in normal peristaltic sound, any vascular groove, venous hum, etc. So this is about the abdominal examination in patient of cholelithiasis. I am not going to the systemic examination or details. It depends upon your finding whether you have to add something or this is a basic thing you have to do. You have to remember these things. Now I will come to a short discussion about some investigation and management. Investigation, first of all, is ultrasonography. This is the initial investigation of choice of any suspected patient of gallstone disease. Advantage, it is non-invasive and no radiation exposure. But one thing is, it is operator dependent. It has got a sensitivity and specificity to detect gallstone over 90%. And stones are acoustically dense and produce acoustic shadow. And gallbladder thickness and peripolycystic collection can also be detected by ultrasonography. So whenever you will be asked about the next thing you will do, what will you do to the first investigation of choice or something, ultrasonography is the investigation of choice in your case. And I have given a picture here, ultrasound examination, you can see a single calculus and with the acoustic shadow. I think you can understand what is the acoustic shadow. Okay. So this is USG picture. USG, you will see USG plate of any patient with cholelithiasis. You can see this type of acoustic shadows and stone. Now, from other investigations, you should at least know something like abdominal X-ray. It is the simplest and oldest imaging modality, although not used nowadays, but very few percentage of 20 to 30% maximum cases gallstone can be radio opaque, and those cases can be diagnosed by doing simply X-ray. So, and along with that, another thing, that is if there is porcelain gallbladder, here there is calcification of its wall due to chronic inflammatory irritation. Okay, so in that case you can detect by X-ray also. In the slide on the left side there is radio opaque calculus, you can see detected by X-ray, and on the right there is X-ray showing the porcelain gallbladder. Oral cholecystography. Now, as you know that now investigation is USG, so it has been largely replaced by USG. Now, what is done in oral cholecystography involves oral administration of radio opaque compound that is absorbed and excreted by the liver and passed into the gallbladder. The stones are noted as filling defect. Now, it is of no value in patient of intestinal malabsorption, vomiting, if there is obstructive cystic duct and hepatic failure. Okay. So this is a picture of oral cholecystography. You can see that filling defect suggesting a stone inside the gallbladder. Now, CT scan and radionucleotide scanning. So CT scan for benign biliary disease, CT is not useful, very useful investigation, and gallstone are often not visualized, and cholecystitis is underdiagnosed in CT scan. So in plain gallstone disease only, CT scan is not that preferred investigation for us. And radionucleotide scanning, it is a non-invasive method and it gives you an idea about the anatomic and functional information. So what is done here? Technetium level derivative of HIDA, actually hydroxyimmunodiacetic acid, is injected intravenously, and it is cleared by the Kupffer cells in the liver and excreted in the bile. And then uptake by liver detected by 10 minutes, and gallbladder is visualized after 60 minutes in fasting patient. So if there is non-visualized gallbladder with prompt filling of the bile duct and duodenum, that is suggested of acute cholecystitis. That is, there is blockage of the cystic duct leading to inflammation of the gallbladder, and in those cases there will be non-visualized gallbladder. Now treatment, non-operative treatment is there. You should know about this. And one thing you should know is about dissolution treatment. There is ESWL also. Now dissolution therapy, there are some indications like functional gallbladder with cholesterol stone. I have already mentioned during the start of stone, discussing about something about stone, that if it is pigment stone, then that pigment stone only can be removed by surgery. So functional gallbladder with cholesterol stone is an indication. Single stone less than 1.5 centimeter, radiolucent stone, these are indication. And drug used are chenodeoxycholic acid for 2 years and ursodeoxycholic acid at a dose of 15 milligram per kg per day. Now problems of dissolution therapy is long duration and results are not satisfactory. And it is in fact expensive because you have to continue the treatment for a long duration. And patient may get the side effects like diarrhea and pruritus also, and can lead to hepatic dysfunction sometimes. So mostly it is not used, but theoretically this is important. You have to know about dissolution therapy. Now, treatment of acute cholecystitis. In acute cholecystitis, in the book it is written that initially we go for conservative treatment, that is non-operative, by putting an nasogastric aspiration, IV fluid, broad spectrum antibiotics, etc. And later after 4 to 6 weeks, we go for elective cholecystectomy. That can be done in open or laparoscopic. Now, there are some indications for emergency cholecystectomy also, like in empyema gallbladder, if the symptoms are persisting, emphysematous cholecystitis, or if there is perforation. In those cases, there is indication for emergency cholecystectomy. And now you have to remember that there is now firm evidence for several randomized prospective trials that early cholecystectomy for acute cholecystitis, that is, if operation is done within the same hospital admission, is superior to delayed cholecystectomy. Okay, provided patient is fit for OT and anesthesia. So nowadays we prefer to go for early cholecystectomy if it can be done within the same hospital admission. Okay, and now about the chronic cholecystitis. Chronic cholecystitis, we go for cholecystectomy. Also here we can go for open or laparoscopic method, but laparoscopic cholecystectomy has been demonstrated to be safe and effective alternative to open one, and has become the treatment of choice for symptomatic gallstone disease. So you can always say that laparoscopic cholecystectomy is the treatment, but you should also know about the open cholecystectomy method. Okay, with that I will conclude the discussion of the longest discussion of cholelithiasis today. And the discussion will be continued on obstructive jaundice by Professor Shivajyoti Goswami.
Hello, sir.
Sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Sir, বলছি মার্ফি সাইন ডেমনস্ট্রেট করার সময় লেফট হ্যান্ড করব না রাইট হ্যান্ড?
কি বুঝলাম না
স্যার, মার্ফি সাইন ডেমনস্ট্রেট করার সময় লেফট হ্যান্ডে করব না রাইট হ্যান্ডে করব?
রাইট হ্যান্ডেই করব।
আচ্ছা, ওকে স্যার, ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ।
স্যার, হ্যালো স্যার, বলছি যে যদি গলস্টোন হয়ে থাকে কিন্তু পেশেন্ট সিম্পটোম্যাটিক নয়, মানে গল ব্লাডার স্যাকে আছে স্টোন গুলো, তাহলে কি মানে কিছু ট্রিটমেন্ট করা হবে?
গলস্টোন আছে কিন্তু অ্যাসিম্পটোমেটিক গলস্টোন ডিজিজ বলছিস?
ইয়েস স্যার।
অ্যাসিম্পটোমেটিক, দেখ আমাদের সেটআপে তো আমরা অ্যাসিম্পটোমেটিক গলস্টোন ডিজিজের অপারেশন না করার অনেক কথা অনেক জায়গায় লেখা থাকে, বাট ফর তোদের জন্য পেশেন্টের পরিচয় চয়েস ক্ষেত্রে তোরা তো সিম্পটোমেটিক বা অ্যাসিম্পটোমেটিক যাইবা, ল্যাপারোস্কোপিক কোলেসিস্টেক্টমি হচ্ছে ট্রিটমেন্ট অফ চয়েস। ঠিক আছে, কারণ ডিসোলিউশন থেরাপির কথা তোদের বলার দরকার নেই কোনো ট্রিটমেন্টে পরীক্ষার জন্য। তোদের ডিসোলিউশন থেরাপি আমি জাস্ট দিয়েছি এটা তোদের জানার জন্য। ডিসোলিউশন থেরাপি সম্বন্ধে জিজ্ঞেস করলে ওটা বলবি। আর ডিসোলিউশন থেরাপি কোলেস্টেরল স্টোনের জন্য ইউজ করা হয়, পিগমেন্ট স্টোনের জন্য ইউজ করা হয় না। ঠিক আছে?
ওকে স্যার।
ঠিক আছে।
Now you can take a break for 10 minutes, right?
Yes, sir. से वीडियो আছে वीडियो আছে কি আছে ভিডিও আছে হ্যাঁ ও দুটো এটা এই না ভিডিও মনে হয় চলে আসবে না আমি ভিডিওটা আলাদা করে আনলে চলবে এটা তো আমার PowerPoint 2019 এ করা আছে না সেটা পেনড্রাইভ করতে টিচিং ভিডিও ঘনশ্যাম বলে একটা টিচিং সিটি হ্যাঁ ঘনশ্যাম অ্যাকচুয়ালি ওদের উপর লিথোটমিটার ছিল যেগুলো দেখতে হবে আমার কাছে এটা স্টার্ট করি के 2007 টানতে পারছে না হ্যাঁ
Hello everybody, good afternoon. All set? Can you
Good afternoon, sir.
Can you hear and see the slides properly? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So after cholelithiasis, we'll be discussing another important topic for surgery, that is obstetric jaundice. So it is a very common scenario in surgical practice. In fact, every week we can see at least 3-4 cases of obstetric jaundice in surgical OPD. So in your examination also, this is a very common surgical problem. So during your final MBS examination, you can expect to encounter in your during your examination obstetric jaundice, either as a theory question or as a long case in specimen, not exactly specimen, in instruments. You may be given T-tube or you may be given Desjardins choledochal lithotomy forceps, from which you may be asked about obstetric jaundice. In X-ray, you may get some plates of say MRCP, in which you might find there is stone in the common bile duct. So from there you will ask questions on obstetric jaundice. And also in sometimes in surgical problems, you may be asked about the preparation of a case of obstetric jaundice. So this is one of the very important topic in surgery for final MBBS examination. But the other thing is that in standard surgical textbook, you won't find a chapter on obstetric jaundice from which you can read nicely and you can answer questions nicely for your examination. So I think you should be very attentive and listen carefully about today's discussion. Just a few points regarding the last topic that is discussed today, that is cholelithiasis. I think along with the discussion that you had with Dr. Uttam, please read about the complications of gallstone. Right? This is a very common question asked. So read about complications of gallstone and well, so let's concentrate on obstetric jaundice. So before you get into a patient of obstetric jaundice, certain points you'll have to remember. Otherwise, you won't be able to make your diagnosis of obstetric jaundice. So remember, the patient may present with either a palpable gallbladder with obstetric jaundice, or patient is not having a palpable gallbladder. Now, if you find a patient of obstetric jaundice with palpable gallbladder, so your probable diagnosis should be either periampullary carcinoma, carcinoma head of the pancreas, gallbladder carcinoma, or carcinoma of the lower end of the common bile duct, or cholangiocarcinoma. And when gallbladder is not palpable, the cause of obstetric jaundice likely to be either choledocholithiasis, that is stone in the CBD, or hilar cholangiocarcinoma, that means malignancy or carcinoma arising from the confluence of common bile duct. So these are the on clinical basis. Now on ultrasonographical diagnosis wise, so ultrasonography can tell you about the level of obstruction of the common bile duct. So when you ask for the ultrasonography for diagnosis, so you can say whether the obstruction is at the lower part of the common bile duct or the obstruction at the upper part or proximal common bile duct obstruction. So if it is again lower bile duct obstruction, the causes may be either choledocholithiasis or periampullary carcinoma or carcinoma of the head of the pancreas and lower end of cholangiocarcinoma. If it is proximal CBD obstruction or upper part of CBD obstruction, so likely to be cause are gallbladder carcinoma or hilar cholangiocarcinoma. But another aspect you should consider is that for diagnosis of obstetric jaundice is, first you will have to diagnose, as you know, there are three types of jaundice, you know. So either it is pre-hepatic jaundice or hepatic jaundice or post-hepatic or obstetric jaundice or surgical jaundice. So obstetric jaundice is also known as surgical jaundice. Why surgical jaundice? Because before the introduction of or before the use of endoscopic interventions, surgery was the only treatment for obstetric jaundice. So that's why it is also called at that time surgical jaundice or post-hepatic jaundice. Now when the patient comes to OPD, so you don't know whether this is a pre-hepatic jaundice or hepatic or hepatocellular jaundice or it is obstetric jaundice. So there are certain clinical symptoms, signs and symptoms from which we can diagnose the case to be obstetric jaundice. So the typical clinical features of obstetric jaundice are: number one is fever with chill and rigor. Excuse me. So either it should be the fever with chill and rigor, itching, and clay-colored stool. So there are three typical features of obstetric jaundice. So not necessarily all the three symptoms should be present. So if any one of the symptoms present along with jaundice, so we can clinically say that this is a case of obstetric jaundice. So when you suspect the case to be a clinically obstetric jaundice, your next aim would be to confirm the diagnosis of obstetric jaundice by biochemical estimation. That means you have to send the blood for liver function test. So from the liver function test, we can determine that this is a case of obstetric jaundice by looking into several parameters of liver function test. So we'll discuss it later on. Now, in other words, if we consider the common causes of obstetric jaundice, then according to the benign natures, or if it is a benign obstetric jaundice, then common bile duct stone or choledocholithiasis, bile duct stricture, benign bile duct stricture. So these are the two common causes. Other causes, that is intrabiliary rupture of hepatic hydatid cyst or chronic pancreatitis, sclerosing cholangitis, choledochal cyst. So these are uncommon cause of benign obstetric jaundice. And the common causes of malignant obstetric jaundice is periampullary carcinoma, that is the commonest in our country, or in this part. Rather, I would say the gallbladder carcinoma. Presently, gallbladder carcinoma is the commonest cause of malignant obstetric jaundice in this part of the country, followed by periampullary carcinoma, carcinoma of the head of the pancreas, cholangiocarcinoma lower end, and rarely the metastatic deposit at the porta hepatis. So these are the, you can classify causes of obstetric jaundice according to benign or malignant nature with this slide. So remember this, there are so many classifications of obstetric jaundice. So either you can classify according to the etiology, or according to malignant or benign, or according to the level of obstruction, whether it is upper part of bile duct or is a mid CVD or the lower part of the common bile duct. So again, to diagnose the cause of, to diagnose the obstetric jaundice, so there are two parts in your diagnosis. One is, first you'll have to say it's a case of obstetric jaundice. Secondly, you'll have to say it's due to. So case of obstetric jaundice has two parts. One is diagnosis of jaundice, that is obstructive jaundice in nature, that is not pre-hepatic or hepatic jaundice, and second part is the cause of obstetric jaundice. So you'll have to always say it's a case of obstetric jaundice due to, if you want to say it's a benign cause, choledocholithiasis, or if you want to say it's a malignant cause, so you'll have to say it's a case of obstetric jaundice due to periampullary carcinoma. It goes like this. So from this slide, these are things you'll have to keep in mind to make the diagnosis, right? So if the patient is comparatively young patient and gives a history of passing clay-colored stool, fever with chill and rigor, pruritus, any one of these three, clinical examination is usually unremarkable except for a few scratch marks. So your diagnosis is probably choledocholithiasis. So young female patient with features of obstetric jaundice, so probably it will be a case of choledocholithiasis. Remember, in choledocholithiasis on clinical examination, gallbladder is not palpable. If the similar type of patients give a history of cholecystectomy and on examination you see there is a cholecystectomy scar, so probably the patient is having a recurrent, benign biliary stricture, postoperative benign biliary stricture, or this could be again a cause of retained CVD stone. That means either the stone was present in the common bile duct before the operation, or a stone has been slipped into the common bile duct during operation, thereby in the post-operative period or later on it presents with obstetric jaundice. And sometimes a patient of gallbladder carcinoma can present following a cholecystectomy, history of cholecystectomy with obstetric jaundice. On the other hand, if the patient is an elderly patient with a history of weight loss and appetite, that means cachectic features with palpable gallbladder, and if the gallbladder is soft in fill or soft to firm in consistency, your diagnosis should be periampullary carcinoma. But if you find the gallbladder is hard in consistency with obstetric jaundice, with features of weight loss and loss of appetite, then your clinical diagnosis should be gallbladder carcinoma. Otherwise, other than this, the abdomen will be unremarkable. Sometimes these are also the presentation, that is obstetric jaundice with very hard liver, with ascites, with cachexia. So these are all features of advanced disease of malignant obstetric jaundice. So keeping this in mind, we will be able to make a clinical diagnosis for case of obstetric jaundice. Now, if you again recap what we have discussed so far, is what are the features, clinical features of obstetric jaundice. So clinical features are pain, weight loss, jaundice will be there, clay color stool and pruritus. Pain may be also present in both malignant and benign obstetric jaundice, but usually in malignant jaundice, pain is a late feature. So, the classical triad, known as Charcot's triad, there is pain, jaundice, and fever. So this typical is known three features combined together are known as Charcot or Charcot's triad. Now, along with this, if the patient shows features of shock and mental confusion, then it is known as Reynolds-Painter. So remember these two things. These are very favorite questions of the examiners. So if in any discussions of obstetric jaundice, examiner will like to ask you what is Charcot's triad or what is Reynolds-Painter. Physical examination usually unremarkable other than the palpable gallbladder. There will be sometimes some few scratch marks. Another important question is Courvoisier's law. Examiners will like to ask you what is Courvoisier's law in case of obstetric jaundice. So Courvoisier's law is, in a jaundice patient, palpable gallbladder is not due to stone in the common bile duct, but due to the obstruction at the lower end of the common bile duct, most likely due to periampullary carcinoma or carcinoma of the head of the pancreas. Why this is not due to stone or due to cholelithiasis? Because why not due to stone in the common bile duct? Because stone in the common bile duct is 99% is a secondary stone. That means the stone has originated in the gallbladder and migrated to the common bile duct. So in choledocholithiasis, 99% cases the gallbladder will be diseased or gallbladder associated with cholelithiasis. Now when there is cholelithiasis, usually the gallbladder wall is thickened. Now thickened gallbladder wall is not capable of distension and thereby it will not be palpable when we do the examination. So this exception is the Courvoisier's law. That means in a jaundice patient, the palpable gallbladder is not due to stone in the gallbladder, but due to obstruction at the lower end of the common bile duct, probably due to periampullary carcinoma or carcinoma of the head of the pancreas.
Sir,
Yes.
Sir, বলছি রেনল্ডস পেন্টারে mental confusion কেন থাকবে?
These are features of sepsis. When there is septicemia, the patient, these are the features of extreme severe septicemia, right? So there will be mental confusion and there will be septicemia and features of shock. Right. So once you diagnose the case to be a case of obstetric jaundice due to either malignant cause or benign cause, next part is your confirmation of diagnosis. Remember, when you say a provisional diagnosis, next the examiner will ask you what you're going to do or what is your next step. Then your standard answer should be, sir, I want to confirm my diagnosis by biochemical examination as well as various imaging modalities, imaging techniques. So first thing is the biochemically you will have to confirm your diagnosis of obstetric jaundice. Now these are the various diagnostic workup. So we can test the urine. There will be absence of urobilinogen, but the bile will be present. Stool will be clay color stool, or there will be features of steatoria. But most important is the blood test, that is liver function test. So in your undergraduate level, this liver function test is very important because it will ask in examination about the various parameters or components of the liver function tests. So it starts like this, and this order should be followed. So remember the liver function test in this same order. So first is the bilirubin is in total bilirubin, then conjugated and unconjugated bilirubin. So you'll have to remember the values because these are very common investigation, and you are supposed to read the or interpret the liver function test with these reports. So in obstetric jaundice, it is expected that the total bilirubin will be increased more than 2 mg%, and of this the conjugated portion will be higher than the unconjugated portion. So otherwise it is known as conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Total protein will be, normal range is 5.5 to 7.5. So this total protein, you'll have to check the total protein level, because this protein level will help you to decide the surgical operation is feasible or not. Because if the albumin is low, then patient will not be fit for surgery. So you'll have to improve the albumin level or protein level before we undertake the patient for any surgical intervention. Because if the albumin level is low, during operation there will be chance of cardiac problem, there will be chance of heart failure. Post-operative period, there will be chance of wound infection or wound disruption. So all these issues will be there. So we'll have to correct hypoproteinemia, if any, before the operation. These enzymes, liver enzymes, are very important. AST and ALT, these are actually in obstetric jaundice. There is not much changes in this hepatocyte liver enzymes. So these are usually not much altered. But in hepatocellular jaundice, as you know, the AST and ALT level will be very much increased. But another important parameters of liver function test is alkaline phosphatase. So actually this fraction is increased in obstetric jaundice. So normal value is 40 to 100 international units. So usually in obstetric jaundice, the values are more than 100 international units. And along with that, you'll have to also assess the gamma GT portions of the liver function test. So this gamma GT, alkaline phosphatase, conjugated bilirubin, these are all increased in obstetric jaundice. Other than biochemical test, we'll have to do certain imaging tests in order to see the level of the obstruction of the common bile duct and also see the nature of obstruction. So if you ask why do you want to image or go for imaging investigation, you'll have to say the examiner, sir, I want to see the level of obstruction of common bile duct and also the nature of obstruction of common bile duct. So level of obstruction means whether it is the upper part of the common bile duct, mid part of the common bile duct, or the lower part of the common bile duct. And nature of obstruction means whether it is a benign nature, that means whether it is a stone or it is a stricture or any other benign pathology like chronic pancreatitis or sclerosing cholangitis. So this may be visible by the imaging investigations. And malignant nature, as we have already discussed, there is a periampullary carcinoma, or it's a carcinoma head of the pancreas, lower end cholangiocarcinoma, carcinoma gallbladder. So all this will be seen by various imaging techniques. So first, non-invasive imaging that can be employed in obstetric jaundice is the ultrasonography. So ultrasonography, again, if you talk about ultrasonography, there are varieties of various modes of ultrasonography. So normally first investigation that we do is the transabdominal ultrasonography. So ultrasonography can also be done by endoscopic means. So when we do that, that is called endoscopic ultrasonography. It can also be done by during laparoscopic surgery. So it is paraoperative ultrasonography, or it is laparoscopic ultrasonography. These are the various techniques. And other than the abdomen, in rectal region, so transrectal ultrasonography, in vaginal region, the transvaginal ultrasonography. So there are various modes of ultrasonography. So the examiner might ask you what are the various modes of ultrasonography. And next important investigation is the CT scan. Now in hepatobiliary region, MDCT is the preferred modality of CT scan. There are various modalities, various forms of CT scan. That is, one is common direct, that is CHD, just contrast enhanced CT scan. But in hepatobiliary region, MDCT, particularly if you are thinking of malignant obstetric jaundice, so MDCT will be more helpful than the other varieties. MRCP is again another imaging, non-invasive imaging investigation, and this can be more helpful in when you think the cause of obstetric jaundice is due to some benign reasons. That is benign biliary stricture, or chronic pancreatitis, or stone in the common bile duct. So in these cases, MRCP will be more helpful than MDCT. HIDA scan is another scan which can be employed to assess the cause of obstetric jaundice. PET or PET-CT, these are all adjunct in case of malignant obstetric jaundice. Of the invasive procedures, ERCP can be employed. Remember, the role of ERCP is nowadays very limited, as ERCP should be employed only for therapeutic purpose. Remember, ERCP can be done for both diagnostic and therapeutic purpose. That means by ERCP we can diagnose a case, and during ERCP we can also have some therapeutic interventions. Like if there is stone in the common bile duct, so during ERCP we can also extract the stone from the common bile duct. That is called therapeutic intervention. So ERCP should only be done when some form of therapy is needed, because ERCP is potentially a dangerous investigation in a sense that it can introduce or precipitate acute pancreatitis, because during ERCP first is the duct, common bile duct is cannulated with a very fine catheter. Now sometimes this fine catheter may go into the main pancreatic duct. Instead of the common bile duct, it can get into the main pancreatic duct, thereby injuring the main pancreatic duct, and thereby it can initiate acute pancreatitis, which is sometimes life-threatening. So that's why only selectively for therapeutic purpose ERCP is employed, because nowadays we have MRCP and MDCT which are non-invasive, and for diagnosis purpose we can utilize this rather than using ERCP for diagnosis purpose. Other than there is some doubtful, even still sometimes doubt exists regarding the cause of obstetric jaundice, particularly in malignant cases, say for periampullary carcinoma or carcinoma head of the pancreas. So side viewing endoscopy is more useful in doubtful periampullary carcinomas. Percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography, that is important and employed when we suspect there is obstruction at the upper part of the common bile duct or at the confluence level or intrahepatic level. So in such situation, percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography can be employed. Endoscopic ultrasonography, as we just discussed, is again another option for imaging, particularly in doubtful cases of malignant biliary obstruction. So when there is doubtful or malignant biliary obstruction, say there is a very small periampullary or very small carcinoma of the head of the pancreas, which is not visible either in the MDCT or say PET scan or in say via the MRCP. So in such situation, EUS, endoscopic ultrasonography, may be helpful, and not only for the imaging, also we can employ fine needle aspiration through the endoscopy guided, and thereby we can make the diagnosis of the pathological condition. In malignant biliary obstruction, yes.
Sir, you told the name of the ultrasound which is done under laparoscopy. Can you please repeat that part?
Yeah, that is one option. Sometimes during laparoscopic surgery, say there is a liver tumor, right? So in laparoscopy, the conventional intraoperative ultrasonography that we do in open surgery, that is cannot be employed. So during laparoscopic surgery, so there are devices which are introduced through the laparoscope, and from there we can image the say there is a tumor in the liver, there is a small hepatocellular tumors, right? So that can be imaged by using the laparoscopic ultrasound devices. So that is laparoscopic ultrasonography. So when we suspect there is some malignant biliary obstruction, so tumor markers like CA19-9 or CEA is also helpful regarding diagnosis and sometimes regarding prognosis of the disease. And final staging, remember this diagnostic laparoscopy is another option which can be employed for the final staging of the disease. Because in spite of all these investigations, sometimes we will not be able to see whether the patient is having any metastatic disease or not. That means sometimes there is a small, say, peritoneal deposits, or there is some sub-centimeter, that means less than 1 centimeter deposits over the liver surface from any primary malignancy, say for carcinoma of the head of the pancreas or periampullary carcinoma. So these small, tiny malignant deposits or secondary deposits cannot be picked up by these various imaging modalities. So these can only be seen by the naked eyes, and this we can do that by doing diagnostic laparoscopy. So just before the operation, we can just do one laparoscopy to see that if there is any minute sub-centimeter deposits over the liver surface or over the peritoneal surface of the abdomen or not. Because if these are there, if these minute deposits are there, then your total plan for surgery will change. Suppose if you are planning for a definitive procedures like Whipple's operations or pancreatorrhinectomy for periampullary carcinoma, or say for carcinoma of the head of the pancreas. But if during diagnostic laparoscopy you see there are small minor deposits, so the patient will not benefit from our definitive procedures, because the life expectancy of this patient will be very small. That means the patient is having advanced malignant disease, and patient will not tolerate such a major operation. So you'll have to change your plan, and then we'll just restore to the palliative procedures that is available. So we'll do minimum so that so long the patient lives, patient is free from the symptoms, and patient have a better quality of life. So that's why the diagnostic laparoscopy is the final staging laparoscopy, and it's very, very important, which can change the course of the treatment for the patient with malignant bile duct obstruction or malignant jaundice. So this is regarding MDCT, that when we suspect that there is obstruction at the lower end of the common bile duct, then we'll have to write pancreatic protocol that is slightly different than when there is upper end obstruction. So we'll go for the triphasic scan. So, okay, these are all technical issues, and I think you don't have much time or patience right now to hear about all these things. But if you can remember this, it will be a plus point, and you can write all these things in your theory exam. Now, MRCP along with MRI, that is will be employed for benign biliary, for benign obstructive jaundice, which means either for benign biliary stricture or doubtful common bile duct stone or hilar cholangiocarcinoma. Why do I say doubtful common bile duct stone? Because common bile duct stone usually very well picked up by ultrasonography. 95% its sensitivity. Only the certain disadvantage of ultrasonography for common bile duct stone is that the lower end of the common bile duct cannot be imaged properly due to the overlying gas shadow in the duodenum, because gas is highly echo-reflective. So the ultrasonography cannot see the lower end of the common bile duct. However, with the modern machines, so this disadvantage has become overcome. So modern machines are very good at diagnosis of common bile duct stone, even at the lower end of the common bile duct. Even then, if doubt exists, so we can ask for MRCP with MRI. Now these are few ultrasonography features of obstructive jaundice. So when you say that there is dilatation of the common bile duct in ultrasonography, so if the common bile duct is dilated more than 10 millimeter on ultrasonography, then we can say it is dilated common bile duct. Intrahepatic biliary channels will also be dilated, and we can also see the nature and level of obstruction, that means whether it's benign or malignant, whether it's the upper end, mid CVD or lower end, whether it's a stone or stricture, malignancy, the CA head pancreas, metastatic lymph node. So all this can be diagnosed by ultrasonography. Disadvantage is that the lower part of the common bile cannot be seen. In MDCT, it's like a one-stop shop. That means you can diagnose the case, the tumor. You can see the tumor, you can see the location of the tumor. We can assess whether tumor is operable or not. That means if there is no lymph node, large lymph node metastasis, if there is no liver metastasis, if there is no ascites, so then probably this case is operable lesion. And along with that, the vascular anomalies can also be seen, because in hepatobiliary region, vascular anomalies are very common. So if you want to do surgery, so you'll have to be familiar with the vascular anatomy before you undertake the surgery. Otherwise, there will be a chance of injury to the important vessels, particularly the arteries, and which may lead to catastrophic hemorrhage, and patient mortality will be very high. So regarding ERCP, as we discussed before, that ERCP should not be used for diagnostic purpose. So it should be used for only therapeutic intention. Now this is how the dilated common bile duct looks on ultrasonography. So you can see this important, these are two echo-reflective walls. You can see these walls, whitish parts of the wall. So the distance between the two walls, that is measured, and if it is more than say it's more than 6 millimeter actually, then it is said to be dilated. Now regarding the diameter of common bile duct, it is said that if it is more than 6 millimeter dilated, then we can say the common bile duct is dilated. If on ERCP it is more than 8 millimeter, then we'll say the common bile duct is dilated. And during operation, per operative measurement, if it's more than 10 millimeter, then we'll say the common bile is dilated. Because in ultrasonography, we measure the internal diameter of the common bile duct. And in ERCP, because we are pushing some contrast, so the common bile duct will be little bit distended, so it is 8 millimeter. And during surgery, in naked eyes, we see the outer diameter of the common bile duct, so that's why it is 10 millimeter. So 6, 8, 10, so these are the various measurements in order to say that the common bile duct is dilated, because dilated common bile duct is one is important feature of obstruction of the common bile duct or obstructive jaundice. These are the CT features. You can see this is the axial picture of the CT scan. This is the gallbladder. This is the common bile duct, and this is the main pancreatic duct. So when the common bile duct and main pancreatic duct both are dilated, it is called double duct sign, which is a features of periampullary or carcinoma of the head of the pancreas, more commonly of the periampullary carcinoma. So here both the ducts are dilated. This is a picture of ERCP. This is the endoscope. Actually, ERCP, as you know, endoscope is introduced, and through the endoscope, the ampulla veta, the papilla is identified, and then it is cannulated, then the contrast is injected. So here, this one is the dilated common bile duct, and we can't see here the intrahepatic biliary radical, so that means the obstruction is likely to be at the level of confluence. So this is a picture of the ERCP. So this is a picture of the MRCP. You can see here this is the confluence, and just below the confluence there is certain cutoff. So there is obstruction. So this is a distal part of the common bile duct. So this is a typical picture of obstruction at the upper part of the common bile duct in the MRCP. So this is another picture of MRCP, and you can see there are filling defects in the common bile duct suggesting stone in the common bile duct. So this is a picture of MRCP picture of choledocholithiasis. So this is another MRCP picture of choledocholithiasis. You can see this is dilated common bile duct, and there is multiple filling defects suggestive of stone. So this is a post-operative picture. So you can see that is the gallbladder, and these are stones in the common bile ducts which has been extracted up following the operation. So in fact, this is called hepatolithiasis because there is stone in the common bile duct, stone in the left hepatic duct, stone in the right hepatic duct, as you can see here. So this is actually a case of hepatolithiasis. That means when there is stone in the common bile duct as well as right and left hepatic duct. Now few words regarding choledocholithiasis. So it is a stone in the common bile duct. So symptoms, that means a Charcot's triad will be there, and maybe on palpation, there will be tenderness in the epigastrium and right hypochondrial scratch mark. So investigations, USG and LFT, of course, LFT you will have to see there's a case of obstructive jaundice, and USG will probably confirm the diagnosis because 99% cases it is very, very sensitive. In doubtful cases, we can go for MRCP. Now this is again very important questions, how to prepare a case of obstructive jaundice. So first thing is there is no scope for domiciliary treatment. Patient needs to be hospitalized. So first is hospitalization of the patient, then specific measures, diet, nutrition, adequate hydration, because this patient has anorexia and does not, sometimes patient have vomiting. So the patients are nutritionally depleted, may be hydrated. So you'll have to correct this with good nutrition and If necessary, IV fluid. Broad spectrum antibiotics are needed. Well, certain points you'll have to remember here, that what are the problem that is associated with obstructive jaundice. There are certain systemic changes that occurs following obstructive jaundice, right? In obstructive jaundice, the problem is that the bile cannot come into the intestine. And as because bile is not coming into the intestine, then what happens? That means the bile is one factor which is responsible for the absorption of the fat-soluble vitamins. So as the fat-soluble vitamins are not absorbed, so vitamin K of important thing is vitamin K is not absorbed, so there is problem with the coagulation. So that is one problem. The patients are having problem with coagulation. Second problem is that since bile duct is obstructed, the bile contains the gram-negative organisms. So there is proliferation of gram-negative organisms, and when there is proliferation of gram-negative organisms, that means they produce huge quantity of enterotoxins or endotoxins. So during operation, what happens? These endotoxins get absorbed in the system and producing systemic endotoxemia. And also these endotoxins are responsible for occasional cholangitis, that is fever with chill and rigor in case of obstructive jaundice. So we'll have to keep these things in mind, and you will have to take adequate precautions before the operations. Another problem with obstructive jaundice is that this bilirubin sometimes, particularly if the patient gets dehydrated, tends to be deposited into the kidney, thereby blocking the kidney tubules, renal tubules, and patient may go into the renal failure. So that's why it is very, very important that patient should be hydrated well. The kidney should be flasked so that the patient does not go into the renal failure. And also these patients with obstructive jaundice are very prone to cardiogenic shock, because there is some myocardial depressing factors are present, which causes the reduced contractility of the heart, and there is increased peripheral vascular resistance. So combining both, the patients are more prone to have certain hypotension. So for all this have to be kept in mind before putting the patient into the operation theater. So that's why the patient needs to be admitted into the hospital beforehand. Diet and the nutrition, hydration, broad spectrum antibiotics, vitamin K to improve if there is any coagulation deficiency that may be improved. IV mannitol is given. Nowadays there is doubts, some controversy regarding use of IV mannitol. This is used mainly for flushing the kidney to prevent renal failure. And there is some role of oral lactulose, because this oral lactulose binds with the enterotoxins or endotoxins which lies in the intestine, in the intestinal wall, in the mucosa of the intestine. And this oral lactulose binds with the endotoxins, and thereby it is excreted out of the body in the form of a stool. So thereby it reduces the viral load, or reduces the endotoxin loads, and therefore the post-operative infection will be less. So these are the specific management for obstructive jaundice. General measures, sometimes it will be helpful if we can reduce the serum bilirubin level, particularly when the bilirubin level is high, say more than 15 mg%. So there are certain measures to reduce the serum bilirubin. If it is a benign obstruction and the patient is having cholangitis, then with the treatment with the antibiotics, so the inflammation and edema of the common bile duct will reduced, and therefore if the stone is there, so stone will get loose in the common bile duct and the bile flow into the intestine will be established. So thereby there will be chance of reduction of the serum bilirubin. But in malignant patients, so there is usually it's a progressive jaundice. So in such patient, sometimes preoperative biliary drainage is employed by means of putting stent in the common bile duct. So that is one area where ERCP is employed. So in ERCP, through ERCP, you can put in a stent into the common bile duct, and thereby the bilirubin level will be reduced. and that will help in patient's management in the post-operative setting. Hemoglobin level should always be more than 10 if you want to plan to undertake any surgical procedures. Avoidance of dangerous drugs, that means the analgesics should be avoided. Sometimes patients are taking too much of analgesics because all these analgesics are excreted through the liver, and the liver is already diseased because overburdened with the bilirubin, so there is a chance of liver failure if the patient continues to take this analgesic drugs. Serum albumin level will be should be more than 30 gram%, as I said. Sorry, not 30, is 3, because that will improve the outcome of the surgery in terms of wound healing, and patient may need IV fluid. Now, if the patient is having stone in the common bile duct, the patient has several options. Patient has several options regarding the treatment. So either the patient can undergo endoscopic treatment, or patient can undergo operative treatment. Operative treatment, again, it may be an open operation or it may be a laparoscopic operation. So if the patient wants to undergo endoscopic treatment, it's fine. So patient will have to have ERCP, and through the ERCP, the stones can be extracted from the common bile duct. Then the patient should be put up for laparoscopic cholecystectomy or cholecystectomy in whatever form. So here I am just going to tell you some steps of choledocholitherectomy or operations by choledocholithosis. The steps are more or less same for both open surgery or for the laparoscopic surgery. So part of this is that cholecystectomy has to be done first, because as I said that stone in the common bile duct is mostly 99% is a secondary stone. That means the stone arises from the gallbladder and that migrates to the common bile duct. That means in choledocholithiasis, the gallbladder is also diseased. That means associated with lithiasis. So cholecystectomy has to be performed always in case of choledocholithotomy. So it is always cholecystectomy with choledocholithotomy. So there is no operations like only choledocholithotomy. So the steps of I'm discussing just about the steps of choledocholithotomy, because cholecystectomy is probably discussed before this lecture. And after performing cholecystectomies, common bile duct is identified by aspiration of bile. So we can see the common bile duct, and then sometimes it is difficult to identify by seeing only. So it has to be confirmed by aspiring bile from the common bile duct. So when you see that this bile, so you know this is a common bile duct. Then 2 stage switches are put over the suprarenal part of the common bile duct, and then in between the stage switches a small incision first is made there, and you see the bile is coming from the common bile duct. You can sometimes see the stone is peeping from the common bile duct. Bile is aspirated and the bile is sent for culture sensitivity. Always very, very important step. The bile, aspirated bile should always be sent for culture sensitivity, and then stones. Then the incision is enlarged from on the both sides, above and below. Then stones are removed by Desjardins choledocholithotomy forceps, and after, when you more or less you are satisfied that all the stones are removed, then CBD has to be irrigated with the red rubber catheter. The catheter is introduced in the common bile duct and it is irrigated, because due to irrigation sometimes some leftover stones may come out in the opening. So these are some steps of choledocholithotomy. So this is a common bile duct, and it is opened into the suprarenal portion. These are 2 stage switches. You can see these are stage switches. These are put, a small incision is made, then it is extended above and below, and then this is Desjardins choledocholithotomy forceps. and through this the stones are removed. Then irrigation is given into the common bile duct, so the stones come out. Now, once reasonably you are sure that all the stones are removed, so you have various options. If you are lucky enough, and if you have the choledocoscope in the operation theatre, you can put the choledocoscope inside the common bile duct and see if there is any leftover stone present or not. So, when you are confirmed that there is no more stones in the common bile duct, so then you have the options, various options for closing the common bile duct. So either you can put in a T-tube over the common bile duct and come out, or if there are multiple stones and you are still not sure that all the stones are removed, then you can do choledochoduodenostomy. Or if the stone is impacted in the lower part of the common bile duct, which is sometimes very difficult to take out because it is impacted, and from the supraduodenal portion of the common bile duct, it is not possible to negotiate the stone upwards and take out through the opening in the choledochotomy. So in such a situation, we'll have to do transduodenal sphincterotomy and sphincteroplasty. That means that duodenum has to be opened, and through the open duodenum, we'll have to identify the ampulla viter, and we'll have to identify the ampulla viter, then make some incisions over there, cut the sphincters, and then after cutting the sphincter, you'll have to remove the stone. So this operation is known as transduodenal sphincterotomy and sphincteroplasty, but nowadays rarely this is done because this part can be done endoscopically, and through endoscopic sphincterotomy we can remove stones impacted in the lower end of the common bile duct. So this is just for theoretical purpose. Sometimes in desperate situation, you might need to do transduodenal sphincterotomy and sphincteroplasty. So actually this was a video of choledocholithotomy, but video will not play here because of this is the old version of PowerPoint. And this is how the T-tube is placed. So this is T-tube is placed. This is choledochoduodenostomy, that is the duodenum is anastomosed with the choledochotomy incision, and this is transduodenal sphincteroplasty. This is duodenum is opened, then the ampulla viter is seen and cut, the sphincter is cut, and this is known as transduodenal sphincteroplasty. So if you put in a T-tube, then the T-tube has to be kept for minimum for 5 to 7 days, minimum for 10 days, right? So this is a picture of T-tube cholangiogram, and this is a T-tube, and after 5 to 7 days we'll have to see the amount of bile that is coming through the T-tube. So if it is less than 300 ml, then we start clamping the T-tube intermittently for next 2 to 3 days. That means for first day for 6 hours, second day for 8 hours, like that. So when it is clamped, we see the patient is experiencing any pain in the abdomen, of if there is an appearance of jaundice, or if the yellow color is of the stool. So if there is no pain, no jaundice, and the stool color is yellow, that means there is no obstruction of the common bile duct. And then we'll do one T-tube cholangiogram, and in the T-tube cholangiogram we'll have to see if there is any free contrast is coming to the duodenum or not. You can see here the contrast media is coming to the duodenum freely, and there is no filling defect into the common bile duct. That means there is no leftover stone, so we are ready to take out the T-tube now. But if T-tube cholangiogram picture is like this, you can see there is a filling defect in the lower end of the common bile duct. You can see it here also. So that means there is some stone in the leftover stone in the common bile duct. So in such a situation, we cannot take out the T-tube, because if we take out the T-tube, then bile will spill through the choledochotomy into the intra-abdomen, and thereby the patient will having biliary peritonitis, and patient may go into shock. So this again will have to do something in such a situation. Otherwise, if there is no distal obstruction, so we are ready to take out the T-tube. And since there is no distal obstruction, so when you take out the T-tube, the bile will follow its normal natural pathway, and there will be no spillage of bile into the peritoneum. So that's why this is very important to assess whether there is any obstruction or distal obstruction in the common bile duct before you take out the T-tube. So satisfactory T-tube cholangiogram means the IBCI, intrahepatic biliary channels are not dilated, CBD is not dilated, there is no filling defect, and there is free flow of the contrast media into the duodenum. So when all these conditions are fulfilled, the T-tube is taken out by a smart pull. So remember, sometimes you may be given T-tube in your examination. T-tube, in X-ray plate, X-ray part, you will have to given a T-tube cholangiogram. So when you are asked to say how do you take out T-tube, so don't say by a smart pull. So you'll have to describe all the procedures. You'll have to describe that you'll have to do one T-tube cholangiogram at the end of 5 to 7 days when the bile to the T-tube has come down to less than 300 ml. Then you will see whether the IHB are dilated or not, CBD is dilated or not, no filling defect, free flow of bile into the duodenum, free flow contrast in the duodenum. So when all these features are met, then we are ready to take out the T-tube. So here are the list of common causes of obstructive jaundice and then treatment, because you don't know what is the cause of obstructive jaundice in your case that you will get in your exam, final image examination. So it is a CBD stone. So either it is a ERCP stone extraction or surgical exploration. In case of carcinoma, head of the pancreas, periampuli carcinoma, lower end of cholangiosphere, it is a pancreaduodenectomy or Whipple's operation. In case of gallbladder carcinoma, if it is operable, then we'll have to go for radical cholecystectomy. If it is benign biliary stricture, so patient need Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy. In case of chronic pancreatitis, patient needs surgical bypass or stenting. In case of choledochal cyst, the excision of cyst followed by Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy. So gallbladder carcinoma as such is not very important for undergraduate students, but however, it is good to know a little bit about gallbladder carcinoma, because if your long case is a gallbladder carcinoma, so you might be asked few questions on gallbladder carcinoma. So I think it's already a very lengthy lecture, so I think you are lacking concentration, so I am skipping this part, but do remember, and in your free time you read about few lines about gallbladder carcinoma. So again, this is a picture of staging laparoscopy in case of gallbladder, in case of carcinoma of the gallbladder. Again, the video is not playing, but you can see here these small nodules are basically metastatic deposits. The white things are basically metastatic deposits which are not seen in any of the imaging procedures like MDCT or MRCP that is being done for this patient. So in gallbladder carcinoma, the radical cholecystectomy is done. Usually the radical cholecystectomy means part of the gallbladder along with the part of the liver, the wedge, either wedge 2 centimeter wedge of the liver or segment 4B or 5 part of the liver, that is taken out along with the lymph node of the hepatorenal ligament and the lymph node of around the rectopancreatic region. So this lymphadenectomy plus radical cholecystectomy, that is definitive operations for gallbladder carcinoma. Now, not necessarily all the patients of malignant obstructive jaundice will be a suitable candidate for operations or definitive treatment. Most of the only around 20 to 25% cases of malignant biliary obstruction are suitable candidate for definitive surgical treatment. But majority of the patients will need palliative care or palliative surgery. So you must know a little bit about the palliative measures that are available for malignant obstructive jaundice. So remember one thing, jaundice per se is not an indication for any palliation. That means sometimes the patient will have malignant obstructive jaundice, but patient has no symptoms related to jaundice. That means patient has no itching or cholangitis. So in such a patient, there is no need for any sort of palliation for jaundice. So indications of palliation for jaundice in malignant obstructions are: number one, if the patient is having intense itching. Sometimes itching is so intense that the patient is not able to sleep at night. So in such a patient, the palliation of jaundice will improve the quality of life. So this can be done either means of stent, that means stent can be metallic stent or plastic stent, but metallic stent will be preferable, although costly, because so long the patient lives, usually this patient, advanced case of malignant obstructive jaundice, life expectancy is hardly 6 to 8 months. So long the patient lives, the stent will be patent. Or we can have surgical bypass, that is called bilioenteric bypass. That means common bile duct has to be bypassed with some intestine, that is bilioenteric bypass or Roux-en-Y hepatogenostomy. If the patient is having gastric outlet obstruction, that means in case of, say, carcinoma head of the pancreas, which has obstruct the duodenum, the patient will have gastric outlet obstruction. So in that case, gastrojejunostomy will be helpful, because otherwise patient will not be able to eat anything and patient will have constant vomiting. Psychiatric counseling is also very important, because most of the patients will be naturally depressed. So psychiatric counseling and medicines may help them. And this is very most important, that record keeping enrollment for clinical trial, because some cases, majority of cases of gallbladder cancer, definitive management is can be given for only a small percentage, or only 5 to 10% of patient we can give definitive management. So we still don't know what are the best options for advanced cases of hepatobiliary malignancy. So only record keeping, various clinical trial and analysis, that may help the treatment options in future. Another clinical entity, that is choledochal cyst, is important for your theory exam. In practical exam, only if you are unlucky, then maybe in some imaging investigations like MRCP, you may be given choledochal cyst. Otherwise, only in theory exam, short note, you can expect short notes on choledochal cyst. So please read about choledochal cyst. Only few things are there. So if you read well, then you can get good marks. So choledochal cyst is more, there are various types of classification of choledochal cyst. So there are Todani classification and there are Todani modification of Olensolage classifications. There are 5 types nowadays. Another one, 6 type is added. So remember the types. And the treatment for investigations are, of course, imaging, of which MRCP is the best. USG can also diagnose, but MRCP is the best form of investigation. And the treatment is usually the excision of the cyst along with Roux-en-Y hepatojejunostomy. For most of the types of cyst, of this type A and type 4 are the commonest type of presentation, and for both these types, excision and excision of the cyst and Roux-en-Y hepatojejunostomy is the treatment of choice. So this is in short about obstructive jaundice. And If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Hello, sir. I have
Yes, carry on.
Sir, what are the measurements for dilated common bile duct? Can you please repeat that part?
Yeah, it's 6, 8, and 10. 6 for ultrasonography, because in ultrasonography we can measure the internal diameter of the common bile. We can't measure the outer diameter of the common bile duct. And 8 millimeter is for the ERCP, because in ERCP we are injecting some contrast, and that's because we inject the contrast, there will be some distension of the common bile duct. So 8 millimeter is taken as the cutoff, because normally it may be 6 millimeter, but when you inject the contrast, there will be distension and it will look like it is dilated. So 8 millimeter is the cutoff mark. And during open surgery, when we see the common bile duct, we are looking at the outer diameter. We don't know what is the inner diameter. So in open surgery, it is considered as the 10 millimeter is the cutoff mark. So how do you know it is 10 millimeter? Because hardly there is anything to measure the common bile duct. So usually the pencil that we used commonly, the outer diameter of a pencil, wooden pencil, is considered as a 10 millimeter. So all of us is quite familiar with the diameter of wooden pencil. So if the common bile duct looks like dilated more than the wooden pencil, so probably it is more than 10 millimeter in diameter. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Okay, then we are closing today's lecture. Thank you very much.